and the associate political editor of the New Statesman, Rachel Cunliffe. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's take a quick look to see what is on the front pages. Well, the Telegraph leads on the violence that's erupted outside a mosque in Southport after 3 girls killed in yesterday's attack were named. The Guardian leads with the tributes to those 3 young girls as hundreds gathered to pay their respects. The Metro describes the 3 young girls who lost their lives as our little innocents. Meanwhile, the Eye's front page also pays tribute to the children and the devastation in the community. The Mail looks to Southport too, saying the little Taylor Swift fans were killed in cold blood. Keep smiling and dancing, the Mirror says, as it describes Southport town in tears. The Financial Times, meanwhile, quotes the Chancellor Rachel Reeves, suggesting tax increases may be necessary to rectify what the government says is a £22 billion black hole in the public purse. And the Daily Star's front page blames today's hot weather for an attack of so-called Dracula flies, whatever they may be. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Rachel Cunliffe and Sebastian Payne. Thank you both so much for being with us, so we can see that horrific story, the events of yesterday in Southport, still making the headlines. Let's take a look at the Daily Mail and the 3 little girls that have been named: the BB King, 6, Elsie Stancombe, 7, and then 9-year-old Alice Aguiar. So an absolutely horrific story, Sebastian, but also we've seen violence erupt just over 24 hours later.
I think it's worth just looking at this front page and the pictures you see here that are also on the Daily Telegraph and other papers tomorrow, because it just highlights what an absolutely appalling act this is. I mean, it completely breaks your heart to see the pictures there of those young girls, I mean, who are just 7, 6 and 9 years old at a Taylor Swift dance class. And we heard from Taylor Swift herself today, who expressed her feelings about this and how awful the attack was. And it just, you cannot begin to fathom, as the Mail calls it, despicable human being in the mind that would cause such an act to happen here. But there's so much we still don't know about what happened here. But in the kind of absence of facts and details, a lot of rumour and conjecture being spread online, which has resulted, as you said, in some of the violence we've seen on the streets. Yeah. And it's been pretty horrific on the streets of Southport this evening. And the fact is, you know, we know that there's a 17-year-old that the police are still questioning, that the counter-terror police are involved in that, but we don't know any more details. And a lot of people are taking various aspersions from rumours online that we should stress we do not know what they are, and that is resulting in violence. But I think pretty soon the law and order authorities are going to have to get a grip on this, because otherwise that black hole of news will just get filled further and further by people making their own conclusions.
And Rachel, just before coming to you, let's take a look at the front page of the Daily Telegraph, because, Sebastian, as you mentioned, their headline is slightly different. Their headline in the Telegraph focuses on what's been happening over the past few hours, so violence erupts, but very much pictorially speaking, the focus, as it should be, on the 3 victims, on these 3 little girls. Rachel, your reaction, I guess, not only to the horrific events of yesterday, obviously, but what we've seen unfold tonight.
Well, I don't think it's surprising that virtually all the papers have led with those 3 incredibly striking, heartbreaking images of 3 beautiful little girls who are now dead. But the Telegraph takes the story on and looks at what's been happening this evening. A vigil that became a riot that has turned into some pretty horrific violence on the streets of Southport. And as Seb said, in the vacuum of really any information at all about the attacker. We know that someone has been arrested. We know they're 17. That's all really we know. A huge amount of misinformation swirling around. The Telegraph notes that there are rumours that have been propagated by Russian state media, a false name, false information about the alleged attacker that really seem to have been invented in order to stir up civic disquiet and ensure that what is an unspeakable tragedy then leads to further violence. And we've seen some absolutely appalling scenes of police vehicles being set on fire, police being attacked, rioting in the streets, of locals begging the rioters to stop and to respect their town and respect the grief of the families. And it really does seem to be escalating into something pretty horrific.
And I was going to just say, and of course, as with a lot of these things, you've had a political element to it as well. That Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, has been there to visit today as well, and Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, is calling people to sort of stop stoking divisions on this stuff as well. And Nigel Farage, the leader of the Reform Party, has demonstrated how unhappy people are with the state of law and order in this country. But this story, I think, has touched towards anyone who's seen it across the country due to the emotional power, the complete sadness, the appalling nature of it. But as this has descended into violence, I think it's not just for the police to get a grip and figuring out what they can and can't say about this, but for politicians as well to be very careful about stoking fears, particularly about between different elements of communities when they
Cooper
don't know.
Mentioned this information specifically.
Yeah. And I think, as Rachel said, that, you know, if you are a bad faith state actor, this is the perfect story where you've got a vacuum of what can't be said because it's a 17-year-old being questioned who is a minor, and that has extra protections in terms of what can and can't be named. So if you're Russian state actors that wants to stir up division, stir up hatred, then this is the perfect way to do it. And unfortunately, I don't really know what the answer to this is, because people will always speculate on social media. You can't stop that. You can't clamp it down.
No, but you can make the point that the people who are rioting and attacking police and using this as an excuse to really riot about a cause that has very little to do with the information that we have so far. You can say that that is in no way acceptable or helpful, and it's an incredibly selfish thing to do, I think, to use a moment of intense grief when a community is trying to make sense and trying to heal after something so appalling, to use that to your own political ends.
Yeah. I'm sure we will be discussing this story in days to come. Let's just move on to another story that I think we would have focused on much more normally. Front page of the Financial Times. Rachel Reeves warns budget will raise taxes as row over £22 billion fiscal hole deepens. Sebastian, obviously this was the speech that Rachel Reeves gave yesterday.
Yes, so this is the question about whether there is a black hole in Britain's finances or not. And, I mean, there's obviously a bit of game playing going on there, that Rachel Reeves has taken an approach similar to the man who came to fix my boiler a couple of weeks ago. That
what did he do?
Well, he said from afar...
I wouldn't start from here, essentially.
No, exactly. Not just that. But first of all, he looked at it from afar and said, oh, it looks fine. Then once he took the lid off, said, oh, it's very difficult, it's going to cost you. And it did actually cost me quite a lot. But I think what you're seeing here is the fact that the Labour Party is trying to create a clear narrative to say that the Conservatives have left the economy in a bad state, there's a hole in the public finances, it's going to have to be filled by spending cuts and tax rises. And Rachel Reeves gave an interview to the Newsagent's podcast this evening where she said that taxes will rise. We knew this was coming before the election, and all we are seeing now is the political theatre to try and explain it. And this is the big test for the new Chancellor, that, you know, she wants to put the public realm into a different place, but she wants to do it by trying to blame it on the Conservatives. I suppose her own decision to hand that big pay rise to parts of the public sector, to make those spending cuts when we all knew where the finances were before the election.
And I suppose if you're going to do it, you might as well do it now when you're still in a slight honeymoon period as a new government.
Well, do it now, and the Conservatives can shout about it, and Jeremy Hunt can say it's not true, and they can't really do anything about it. And yes, the public sector pay settlement for doctors, that has added to the fiscal black hole, but a substantial amount of it, the majority of it, was there before in the books. And I think there are questions that the Conservatives should be asking themselves about how they let the public finances get into that state. I imagine they just didn't think they were going to win the election, so it wasn't going to be their problem. But some really difficult decisions for Labour coming up. They've made a number of unpopular decisions already, one of them on ending the winter fuel allowance as a universal benefit. It's now only going to go to the poorest of pensioners, which has proved very controversial, even though a number of people who have looked at wealth demographics in this country might argue that that is the right thing to do. Also questions on social care. And the one that particularly struck me is on infrastructure spending, because if Labour really wants to go for growth, if they want to get the economy back on track, they want to get the economy growing again, then infrastructure spending, particularly on transport, is a key way of doing that. So cutting that that at this point is slightly worrying.
You've got 10 seconds, Sebastian.
I agree with Rachel. It's an easy thing to say that on transport spending industry, you're completely right, that the whole narrative before the election was growth, growth, growth. And very quickly, we've gone, dare I say it, back to a slightly traditional Labour thing of tax, tax, tax.
On that note of unity, let's go to the break because coming up, the Conservative leadership candidate, Kemi Badenoch, denies allegations that she bullied colleagues while in government. We'll discuss that next.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours, and we're going to take it back.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power. Now, freedom! There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes, torrential rain and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued with its ultimatum to the people of Ashkelon, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in. Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me now, Sebastian Payne and Rachel Cunliffe. OK, let's go straight to The Guardian. Front page there, one of their stories. Badenoch traumatized and bullied senior staff. So this is Kemi Badenoch being accused of creating an intimidating atmosphere in the government department she used to run. She's been described as toxic. Now, I just want to point out that in a tweet earlier on, she very strongly denied these allegations. But Rachel, talk us through what the story actually is.
This is a really interesting story because we've had stories like this before about senior cabinet ministers accused of bullying civil servants. Happened with Priti Patel, who managed to outlast it. Happened with Dominic Raab, who was forced to resign after it. Happened with Gavin Williamson, who was also forced to resign. So this is something that happens to senior politicians, and I think how they react to it is quite interesting. Now, why is this story happening now? Obviously, because Kemi Badenoch is seen as the front-runner to be the next Conservative leader, and there are lots of journalists digging around, and there are also a number of Conservatives who perhaps support other candidates who are prepared to give them some dirt, give them some information. The fact that this story has come out, not a surprise. Kemi Badenoch's response, which you alluded to, pushing back very, very fiercely on it on Twitter, and also criticising the Guardian journalist Pippa Creer for trying to report the story in the first place, and suggesting that there was some kind of dirty campaign against her. That's kind of interesting because this is the rough and tumble of politics. This should have been anticipated, and I don't think it would necessarily be that much of a story if she hadn't had a bit of a tantrum about it. I mean, yes, it's on the Guardian front page, but it's quite a small story there. I think it's going to run for longer because she had such a negative reaction to it.
What does it say about her leadership campaign?
Well, I think, obviously, as the story says in the introduction, Kemi Badenoch is the front runner, and one of the things British politics doesn't like is tall poppies because people try and chop them off as quickly as possible. So I think it's not a surprise that this sort of thing is happening. I think just to pick up on something that you said, Rachel, about why this is coming up now, I think Ms Badenoch had said and tweeted that this had been running for a while and this was not necessarily a new kind of thing. But look, all I can do is give my personal perspective on this, that I worked with Kemi Badenoch in a past life when I was at the Spectator magazine, and I would say, I think she would admit herself that she can be very robust. She has very high standards in terms of what she does with her work. And the question is, as we see, as you mentioned, we had this before with other ministers, is where the line is crossed there. And she vigorously denies that the department says there were no complaints or formal investigation on this. So this is kind of really just hearsay at the moment. So the question is going to be is there more of this, and does it become more substantial? Because at the moment, there is this question of where is that line of acceptable behaviour, and I have no doubt that when she was Business Secretary that Ms Badenoch was very tough on staff and that she demanded high standards, and the question is, did that cross the line or not? And because of the fact there was no formal investigation or complaints, we just don't know.
All right. Let's go to the Metro, page 5. Higher cost of university life puts more people off. So apparently a third of Brits are sceptical that paying to study for a degree is actually worth the investment. Tell us more about the story, Rachel, and what do you make of it?
Well, this is kind of quite worrying because when tuition fees were trebled in 2012, one of the arguments for why it was OK to do that was that the loan system meant that you wouldn't start paying it back until you were on a certain salary, and therefore it wouldn't discourage people, particularly from low-income backgrounds who didn't have family support to rely on, from going to university. Now it's looking like it's starting to. And if you see university as a key way to drive social mobility, that people can go to university, they can get into professions that they wouldn't have had access to otherwise, and they can make a career of that, and they can raise their living standards, that's really worrying. Now, we need some more detail about this. We need to know a bit more about what courses are considered good value and which ones aren't, and that's something that the last Conservative government really focused on. There's also the question of apprenticeships and whether an apprenticeship or a degree apprenticeship that combines the two is better value than the standard 3-year degree. But I would be worried about this because if people are losing faith in university, that's quite a negative sign.
Sebastian, forgive me, we don't have time for your views right now, but we'll get them in the next hour. Thank you so much, Sebastian. And Rachel, coming up next on Sky News at 11, more on those disturbances tonight on the streets of Southport.